I was used and manipulated by my father for years. What he did to me will shock you. The scene I'll never forget happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on the couch, staring at my phone, reading a message from my father. It was short, cold, and yet weighty. He said he needed me, that he was alone, that his wife had left him, and that now he was the only one left with me. At that moment, I felt a tightness in my chest, as if everything from the past had come rushing back. The sleepless nights, the exhaustion of working to support the family, the contemptuous looks from my stepmother, Patricia, the manipulation disguised as care that my father always used to trap me. My whole body trembled, my breath became shallow, and my first reaction was guilt. Should I help? I thought. But along with the guilt came anger. Where was he when I needed him? Where was he when I begged for support? When I carried alone responsibilities that should never have been mine? My name is Marina. I'm 34 years old, and for a long time, I believed that being a daughter meant obeying, supporting, and sacrificing without question. I grew up with a controlling father and a stepmother who treated me like an intruder. My mother left my life early, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't handle his toxicity. I became the pillar of the household, even though I was just a teenager. My internship salary barely covered me, but I was handed over entirely to him. I believed it was my duty. When I complained, I was told I was being ungrateful, that I only thought of myself. This kind of rhetoric stuck with me like poison. And even as an adult with financial independence, I still felt chained to the role of a daughter who had to take care of everyone. The realization didn't come overnight. It took years of swallowing hard, trying to be enough. I remember one Christmas when I worked late into the night, arrived exhausted, and found my father complaining that I hadn't helped with the shopping. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're only good for paying the bills." That destroyed me inside, but at the same time planted a seed of doubt. Was that my role? Just to serve? Just to carry the burden? I spent days crying in secret, feeling like I would never be loved, only used. My stepmother, Patricia, that same night, made a point of telling me that I should be more grateful, because at least I had a father present. It hurt to hear that, because presence wasn't what I felt. It was prison. The one who truly held my hand in silence was my Aunt Inez. She never said much, but when she noticed my lost look, she'd say, "You don't have to carry this alone." I didn't believe her, but each time I heard it, it was like a small crack of air entering a stuffy room. Little by little, that phrase became more and more resonant. She was the one who showed me that I could live with my maternal grandparents for a while. Aparecida and Amaro didn't have luxuries, but they did have love. And the first time I slept at their house, I woke to the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread. Without shouting, without demands, without manipulation. I cried that morning because I realized it was possible to live differently. It was strange, almost painful to experience peace after so many years of war. Even so, guilt haunted me. I was far from my father's house, but every call from him made me feel like I was abandoning someone helpless. He'd say things like, "You're the only one I have. If it weren't for you, I'd already be done with it." These phrases crushed me. I felt nauseous, had stomach aches, and spent hours wondering if I was too cruel. It was at this point that I almost went back. I almost gave in. But one day I realized that every time I helped, he would feel better for a moment. And then he'd immediately tell me it was never enough. I was living in a never-ending cycle of exhaustion. The difference was that now, I was beginning to understand that maybe I wasn't the one at fault. Maybe the problem was his manipulative ways. This realization began to give me the strength to resist, even as I trembled inside. The real turning point came when I decided to cut off financial support completely. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was at work, exhausted, and I got another call from him asking for money. It wasn't for medicine. It wasn't for anything urgent. It was to pay for a dinner he wanted to impress Patricia. I hung up the phone and started crying in the bathroom. The floor seemed to spin, my hands were sweating, and for the first time I heard myself say, "Enough." I went back to the desk and wrote a short, direct message. "Dad, I'm not sending you anything else. I need to get on with my life." I sent it trembling, afraid of the response. And it came quickly. A barrage of accusations, calling me ungrateful, saying I was ruining his life. I was shaking so hard I almost vomited, but I didn't back down. In the days that followed, it was as if I were in mourning. I would wake up to my phone full of text messages and long audio messages, full of drama and emotional blackmail. He would say I was worse than my mother, that I had abandoned him. These words resonated deeply because since I was little, he had made me believe I couldn't be like her. Each message left me paralyzed, unable to eat, with chest pain. Auntie Inez told me to block him, but I still didn't have the courage. It was as if blocking him would confirm that he truly no longer existed in my life. I was afraid of being the cruel daughter who left him alone. It was a daily battle between wanting to breathe and not being able to cut the last thread. It was during this time that my grandparents became my safe haven. My grandmother, Aparecida, always said, "A daughter is not a slave. Love cannot be accompanied by debt." I cried hearing this because it seemed simple to her, but to me it was a maze. My grandfather, Amaro, quieter, would just sit beside me and remain silent. But that silence was full of welcome. I remember one day when I broke down in the kitchen, saying I couldn't carry this weight anymore, and he simply held my hand without judgment. It was in that gesture that I realized that true love demands nothing in return. True love doesn't humiliate, doesn't manipulate, doesn't suck every last drop. This was one of the greatest discoveries of my life. Despite this, there were setbacks. One night, I sent money again. I had sworn not to help anymore, but he called me crying, saying he had nothing to eat. I couldn't take it. I made the transfer and spent the night awake, feeling guilty for giving in, but also guilty for not being able to trust him. The next day, I discovered he had spent some of the money on alcohol. I wanted to beat myself up for believing him again. It was at that moment that I understood it wasn't about hunger or real need. It was about control. And if I continued, he would never change. I would have to change first. This realization was painful, but also liberating. Little by little, I began to rebuild my life in a practical way. I went to therapy, even though it was expensive. I cried during the first few sessions, unable to organize my sentences, but I left feeling lighter. I wrote down in a notebook all the phrases that came to mind when he tried to manipulate me. "You're only good for paying the bills. You're just like your mother." My psychologist asked me to mentally respond to these phrases as if someone else were speaking to me. At first it seemed ridiculous, but then I began to realize that I didn't have to believe everything I heard. His voice inside me didn't have to be my voice. That was the first time in years I felt like a marina without chains could exist, even if it was just a fragile outline. Over time, I realized my life was coming to a standstill because of this relationship. I worked, but I wasn't enjoying the money. I went out with friends, but I wasn't truly present. Always worried about the next bill, my father's next outburst. It was like living on constant alert, waiting for the next attack. I had a headache almost every day, and my body was constantly tense. That's when I made a radical decision. I changed my phone number. I didn't tell him. I didn't send an explanation. I just changed. For the first few days, I felt like I was betraying someone. It felt like I'd committed a crime. But gradually, the absence of his noise gave me space to breathe. I discovered how much silence can be a gift. During this time, I truly got to know my cousin Claudio. He'd always been distant, but when he learned I was living with my grandparents, he started showing up more. At first, I thought it was strange. I thought he just felt sorry for me, but I soon realized it was different. He wasn't coming to demand anything. He came to be there. I remember one afternoon we were having coffee and he said, "You don't have to be anyone's hero. It's time to be your own." Hero. That broke me. I cried in front of him without shame because it was the first time someone had said something so simple, yet so true. The guilt still haunted me, of course. There were nights when I dreamed of my father, asking for help, begging. I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing, and the first urge was to grab my phone and call. But then I'd remember all the times he'd pinned me against the wall, telling me I was good for nothing but paying the bills. I took a deep breath and forced myself not to act on impulse. I started using a trick I learned in therapy, writing a letter before making any decision. I'd write what I felt, as if it were for him, but I never sent it. Just the act of getting it out helped me control the urge to give in. One of the most memorable moments of this period was when my father personally showed up at my grandparents' house. He arrived unannounced, knocking on the gate as if he owned the place. My heart raced. My hands went cold. I trembled just hearing his voice shouting my name. My grandmother firmly said I wasn't obligated to leave, but I decided to face it. I opened the gate and saw that man who once seemed giant before me, now smaller, dejected, but still with that demanding look. He tried to hug me, and I recoiled. I said with a choked voice, "Dad, I'm not your crutch anymore. I won't live to support your choices anymore." He laughed, mocked, and told me I was being manipulated by everyone. But I didn't give in. I closed the gate, in his face, crying, but for the first time feeling like I had chosen myself. After that day, it was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't the end of the pain, but it was a beginning. I still cried a lot. I still felt cruel at times, but I also began to experience true freedom. I did small things that were previously unthinkable. I bought clothes for myself without guilt. I went on a trip with a friend without having to explain myself. I even dyed my hair a color I'd always wanted but which he criticized. Each gesture seemed small, but for me it was like removing bricks from a wall that had imprisoned me for years. I began to understand that freedom wasn't the absence of pain, but the presence of choice. The next step was learning to deal with the guilt that still plagued me. I felt a constant pressure of responsible daughter, as if abandoning my father were a crime. I often woke up in the middle of the night with a tight chest, remembering the times he'd told me I was ungrateful. The sensation was physical, as if each word left a mark on my ribs. It was during this time that I decided to write a list of everything I'd sacrificed for him, yet still felt exhausted. Seeing it on paper made me realize I'd given more than he deserved. Every tear, every sleepless night, every choice I made to try to please someone who never appreciated my efforts, all of this no longer needed to define my life. I came to appreciate the support of my Auntie Inez and my grandparents. They showed me that family can also mean respect and acceptance. Over time, I began to establish clear boundaries. For example, I didn't answer calls at times I knew they would be demanding. I didn't discuss topics that would exhaust me, and I always responded firmly, even though I was shaking inside. At first, it felt like I was being too harsh, but gradually I realized that firmness wasn't rudeness. It was survival. I no longer needed to justify my choices or feel guilty about taking care of myself. Claudio became an unexpected presence of constant support. He wasn't perfect, but he offered me genuine friendship. Often when I came home crying, he was there to listen to me without judgment. One day, while we were walking through the park, he said, "You don't have to be everything to everyone anymore. You can be enough for yourself." That phrase stuck with me. It was as if someone had turned on a light in a room that had been dark for years. I realized that protecting my freedom and my balance wasn't selfish, but an act of emotional survival. My stepmother, Patricia, realizing my father was alone and fragile, tried to manipulate me again, trying to convince me to reconnect with him. But I wasn't the same. I recognized the patterns of manipulation and didn't give in. I remember a conversation in which she told me I needed to be human and forgive. I simply replied, "Being human also means not destroying myself to keep you or him afloat." My heart raced. I felt fear of retaliation, but also enormous relief. For the first time, I felt my words carried strength, not fear. It was in this process that I understood something essential. Loving yourself isn't selfish. I didn't need to be responsible for anyone's happiness or stability, not even my father's. Every choice I made to protect myself didn't diminish my love for him, but preserved my sanity. For the first time in years, I felt peace when I slept, without that constant tightness in my chest. I still struggled with sadness and painful memories, but I learned to embrace the pain without letting it imprison me. The balance was delicate, but real. I was finally living for myself, and that gave me the strength to keep going, even when tempted to give in again. Over time, I learned to identify the triggers that made me feel guilty and anxious. Every time my father called or texted, I would stop, take a deep breath, and think, "He doesn't define my life." It was a slow, stumbling process. I remember one time I almost gave in and walked to the door, ready to open it, but I stopped. I felt my whole body tremble, and for the first time I said out loud, "No, Marina, you deserve peace." The feeling of authority over my own life was new and strange, but also liberating. With each small gesture of resistance, I felt my legs gain strength to walk without the support of anyone who didn't respect my space. I began rebuilding my routine and my dreams. I enrolled in courses I'd always wanted to take, traveled alone for the first time, and began taking better care of myself, both physically and emotionally. I learned to value my achievements without expecting anyone's approval. Every small success was mine, and that was a feeling I'd never fully experienced. I remember buying my first apartment alone. Every choice, every detail of the decor, reminded me that I was capable of creating a life that no one else controlled. The sense of security and belonging was profound and unprecedented. My relationship with my father changed completely, not in the sense of closeness, but in awareness. I understood that I didn't need to forgive to move forward, and that setting boundaries wasn't a lack of love. He kept trying to get me involved, but I stood firm. I learned to say no firmly and without guilt. This skill became my shield. Each time I said no and stood by my decision, I felt as if I were peeling away a layer of fear that had enveloped me for years. Life began to take on colors I hadn't seen in a long time: freedom, choice, autonomy. Today, I can look back without shame or guilt. Of course, I still feel the pain of everything I've been through, and sometimes I miss a family that never existed the way I dreamed. But at the same time, I feel proud of myself. I look in the mirror and see a woman who survived, who learned to love herself, to protect herself, and to refuse to be used. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. I am responsible only for myself, and that will never again be a burden, but a gift. If I could leave a message for anyone reading this right now, it would be simple. You don't have to destroy yourself to keep someone else standing. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. I still have painful memories, and some scars will never fade, but I've learned that it's possible to build a peaceful life even after years of manipulation. Today I'm free, strong, and aware of my choices. Every tear, every fear, every stumble was worth it because they brought me here, living, breathing, and finally owning myself.